My name is Carmen Vega, and what I'm about to share isn't just another tale. It's my personal account of encountering the depths of hell and the immense mercy of God. I was born in Monterrey, Mexico, in a family where witchcraft wasn't merely a practice. It was our way of life. My earliest memories are tinged with the scent of copal incense and black candles. My grandmother, Dolores, revered across northern Mexico as a powerful witch, raised me. My mother, following in her footsteps, catered to politicians and influential businessmen seeking power and revenge. Our home, an ancient colonial building in downtown Monterrey, was always bustling with desperate people seeking spells and cleansings. I vividly remember the first time I witnessed something supernatural. I was only 7 years old, on a night illuminated by a full moon, when my grandmother led me into her workroom. The walls were adorned with images of dark saints and La Santa Muerte. In the center, there was an altar with black and red candles. "It's time you learn the family business," she said, lighting the candles. That night, I saw the shadows on the walls come alive. My grandmother summoned her spiritual guides, and for the first time, I saw them, shadows in human form, but their eyes, those eyes glowed with a reddish hue I can never forget. Instead of fear, I felt fascination. My grandmother, seeing my reaction, smiled and said, "You have the gift, my child. You'll be more powerful than I." The ensuing years were filled with constant training. I learned to read tarot cards, prepare spells, and communicate with what we believed were guiding spirits. My childhood was far from normal. While other girls played with dolls, I was learning to manipulate candles and cast love spells. By the time I was 13, I underwent my formal initiation. It was a moonless night, and the ritual lasted for hours. They made me drink a concoction of herbs and blood. I recall the metallic taste in my mouth and how everything began to swirl. I saw things that night, things no child should ever witness. That was when I made my first pact with the shadows, unknowingly selling my soul. My grandmother was proud. "Now you're one of us," she said, handing me my first personal altar. My mother wept with joy that night, declaring the family tradition was secured. What we didn't know was that each ritual, each spell, each invocation was sinking us deeper into an abyss from which escape seemed impossible. Witchcraft brought us power, money, respect, but the price we paid was far higher than we could have imagined. The following years were intense with learning. I became my grandmother's favorite, the heir to all her dark knowledge. People began to seek me out, first out of curiosity, then for my reputed power. By 15, I had my own clientele. By 17, I was renowned throughout Monterrey. Yet, there was something that troubled me at night when I was alone in my room. A void no ritual could fill, a darkness growing deeper with each task I performed. I didn't realize it then, but that void was my soul crying out for salvation. No one warned me that the power I thought I had was actually a chain dragging me to the very gates of hell. But that's a part of the story I'll share later. By the time I turned 20, my reputation in the occult world had soared. People from other states came to see me. Money flowed easily. I charged thousands of pesos per ritual, and people paid without hesitation. Ambition and power consumed me more and more. My specialty was love bindings and vengeance work. I particularly remember a client named Diana, the wife of a prominent Monterrey businessman. She came one October afternoon, desperate because she had discovered her husband's infidelity. "I want him to suffer," she said. "I want him to feel the pain I feel." This job marked a turning point in my life. For this, my spiritual guides demanded a darker ritual than usual, one that required animal sacrifice and human blood, my blood. It was the first time I truly felt terror during a ritual, but the power I experienced that night was intoxicating. The outcome was successful. The businessman lost everything within months: his mistress, his company, his health. Diana paid me a fortune, and my fame grew even more. But something changed within me that night. The spirits that accompanied me became more demanding, more violent. I began experiencing terrifying nightmares, seeing grotesque faces lurking in the shadows, and hearing voices calling to me from the darkness. To maintain control over my powers, I started consuming cocaine, telling myself it was to expand my spiritual consciousness, but in reality, I was losing grip on my sanity. My personal altar grew to fill an entire room. The walls were adorned with esoteric symbols. Black candles burned day and night, and the scent of incense and dried blood permeated everything. My grandmother, before passing away, had left me her darkest spell books, grimoires handed down through generations. One day, a powerful man, a politician whose name I cannot disclose, visited me. He wanted to eliminate his competition in the upcoming elections. The payment he offered was astronomical. The ritual we performed that night was the darkest I had ever undertaken, involving elements that still send shivers down my spine. The results were effective. His political rival suffered an accident that left him in a coma. However, the price I paid was steep. Spirits began to manifest physically in my home. Objects moved on their own, and I heard sinister laughter echoing through the night. My addiction to drugs worsened. I needed more and more to keep the terror at bay. My mother noticed the change in me and warned, "You're delving too deep. There are boundaries you shouldn't cross." But I was too lost in my own power, too addicted to the control I believed I had over the dark forces. Unbeknownst to me, these forces were leading me to a point of no return. Each ritual brought me closer to the abyss. Each job was a step toward my own undoing. The spirits that once served me now tormented me. I began seeing shadows even during the day, hearing voices commanding me to commit terrible acts. My home became a place feared even by other witches. People who entered felt a crushing oppression in their chests, some fainting upon arrival. I myself could barely sleep. The nightmares were becoming more vivid and terrifying. But the worst was yet to come. I didn't know that I was soon to face an encounter that would change my life forever, a face-to-face meeting with the true face of evil I had been serving all those years. The following months were a descent into utter madness. My addiction to cocaine had spiraled out of control. I needed it not just for the rituals, but to function on a day-to-day basis. The demonic manifestations in my home had become so intense that even my mother, accustomed to the supernatural, refused to visit. One particularly dark night, while conducting a high magic ritual, something went horribly wrong. I was summoning a spirit more powerful than usual, seeking to enhance my abilities. The ritual room chilled so intensely that I could see my breath. The black candles extinguished all at once, and in the darkness, I saw a tall, dark figure with eyes like burning coals. We finally meet face to face. The entity spoke with a voice that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. "You've been a good servant, but now we want more." At that moment, I realized that I had never been in control. I was the one being controlled. The rituals became more extreme. The spirits demanded increasingly dark sacrifices. My clientele shifted. No longer did people come seeking love or wealth, but rather sinister individuals wanting to inflict real harm on others. I became a specialist in curses and death works. My body began to show signs of deterioration. I had lost weight dramatically, developed deep dark circles under my eyes, and my skin had taken on a grayish hue. The marks of the rituals covered my arms, scars from ritualistic cuts I inflicted to obtain blood for the darkest works. One night, during a particularly intense ritual, the realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. I was not the master of these ceremonies, but a pawn in a much darker game. The entities I'd been worshiping, the powers I had tapped into, were consuming me from the inside out. The path I was on was leading to my inevitable destruction, and I had to make a choice. Continue down this road to ruin or find a way to break free from the chains of darkness that had ensnared me. The decision I made that night would determine the fate of my soul and the course of my life from that moment forward. During an exceptionally intense ritual, I experienced a vision that terrified me. I saw my future, my death, and my eternal condemnation. The torment awaiting me was clear as day. Yet my addiction to power and drugs was so consuming that not even this vision could stop me. My home had transformed into a portal of malevolence. People on the street could feel the evil emanating from it and would cross to the opposite side to avoid it. Dogs would howl as they passed by, and unearthly screams and wails could be heard at night. I could no longer sleep without a heavy dose of drugs. The spiritual guides who once whispered to me now shouted, commanding me to commit terrible acts, and I obeyed like a puppet. My personal altar had become a sanctuary of horror, stained with blood and adorned with symbols that would strike fear into the bravest of hearts. One afternoon, while preparing an especially malevolent task, I felt a presence so evil that even I, accustomed to darkness, was filled with terror. My drug consumption skyrocketed. I needed more and more cocaine to silence the voices and to carry out the increasingly demanding rituals. Marcos, my dealer, warned me about the dangerous amounts I was consuming, but I couldn't stop. In the final week before the incident that would change my life, I barely slept. The entities wouldn't let me rest. I saw shadows moving throughout the house, heard macabre laughter, and felt invisible hands touching me. My reality had become a living nightmare. I didn't realize it then, but I was on the brink of the abyss. The demons I had served for so long were ready to collect their due, and the price would be my very soul. What I experienced during those 6 minutes of clinical death defies all human description, but I'll try to share what I saw and felt, though words can never fully capture the horror. When my soul left my body, I felt as if I was being dragged down by an implacable force. I was falling at a vertiginous speed through utter darkness. The cold was so intense it felt like it was burning. As I descended, I began to hear screams, cries, and howls of pain that would chill blood. Suddenly, I found myself in a place I can only describe as the antithesis of all that is good and beautiful. The air was thick with an unbearable stench of burnt flesh and sulfur. The ground beneath my feet seemed to pulsate as if alive and in constant agony. I saw tormented souls everywhere. Some were immersed in what looked like lakes of fire, screaming in agony, yet unable to die. Others were chased and torn apart by creatures beyond description, only to regenerate and suffer the same torment repeatedly. Most shocking was recognizing faces among the damned. I saw former occult masters who had taught me, witches and warlocks I had admired, all their enduring unimaginable torments. One of them looked at me and shouted, "We warned you not to go this far. Now you're condemned like us." I felt an overwhelmingly evil presence, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere resonated. "Welcome to your eternal home, Carmen. You have served well, and now you will receive your reward." In that moment, I understood the true nature of the powers I've been dealing with. They were not spiritual guides or sources of power, but deceptive demons leading me to damnation. I saw all my past actions, every dark ritual, and every person I had harmed with my witchcraft. Each malicious act seemed amplified 1,000-fold, and the weight of guilt was unbearable. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I wanted to flee, but there was no escape. The terror and desperation I felt surpassed anything I had ever experienced on Earth. Then, amidst this indescribable horror, something inexplicable occurred. Deep within me, from a place I didn't know existed, a cry emerged. It wasn't a cry of terror, but a desperate plea. "Jesus, help me." I don't know where that name came from. I had never been a Christian, nor had I ever prayed to Jesus. But in that moment of absolute despair, it was the only name that came to me. The instant I uttered that name, I saw a light. It was faint at first, but grew in intensity. The demons surrounding me recoiled, shrieking in rage. I felt myself being pulled upward, away from that place of torment. The last thing I heard before completely leaving hell was that malign voice, now filled with fury. "She belongs to us." But it was too late for them. The light enveloped me entirely, and I felt a peace I had never known. It was then that I heard doctors shouting, "We have her back. She's returning." I opened my eyes in the ambulance, gasping and weeping. I had returned, but I was no longer the same person. In those 6 minutes, my entire life had changed. I awoke in the intensive care unit of the University Hospital of Monterey, surrounded by machines and the constant beeping of heart monitors. My body was weak, but my mind was clear. The experience I had just lived through was etched into my memory like a brand. The doctors were astounded, telling me I had suffered a massive overdose and that my heart had stopped for 6 minutes. Medically, it was a miracle that I was alive and without apparent brain damage. But I knew it was more than a medical miracle. I had experienced something beyond this world, and it had changed me forever. In the hospital, the early days were a blend of physical recovery and emotional turmoil. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of hell. The terror of those moments was still raw, waking me up screaming in the middle of the night. It was during one of these sleepless, anguished nights that I met Pastor Ramirez. He was the hospital chaplain and had come to visit the patients. Normally, I would have refused to speak with a man of God, but something in his kind gaze made me feel safe. "I've seen that look before," he said gently. "You've seen things you can't explain, right?" I broke down in tears and, for the first time, shared my experience with someone. I told him everything about my life as a witch, the overdose, the 6 minutes in hell. I expected judgment, condemnation, but instead, he listened with compassion. When I finished, Pastor Ramirez took my hand and said, "Carmen, what you have experienced is real, but so is the love and forgiveness of God. Jesus saved you from that place for a reason. He has a plan for your life." His words sparked a glimmer of hope within me. For the first time in years, I felt there was a way out, a path away from the darkness that had been my home for so long. The following days were intense. Pastor Ramirez visited regularly, bringing a Bible and sharing passages about redemption and new life. I read about Paul, a persecutor of Christians who became an apostle, and felt that my life could take a similar turn. My conversion process was neither easy nor instantaneous. There were times when demonic voices still tried to reach me, moments of doubt and fear. But every time that darkness approached, I remembered the light that had saved me from hell and called upon the name of Jesus. A week after my admission, still in the hospital bed, I made a life-changing decision. With Pastor Ramirez by my side, I prayed sincerely for the first time, asking for forgiveness for my sins and surrendering my life to Christ. In that moment, I felt as if a huge weight was lifted from my shoulders. I wept, but these were not tears of fear or anguish. They were tears of relief and gratitude. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Before I was discharged, I was baptized in the hospital chapel. It was a simple yet profoundly significant moment. As the water flowed over my head, I felt my old life slipping away, taking years of darkness and sin with it. I left the hospital as a new person. I knew the path ahead would not be easy. I had to confront my past, destroy the remnants of my old life, and possibly face the wrath of those I had served in the world of witchcraft. But I was no longer alone. I had Christ by my side, and that certainty gave me a strength I had never known before. My new life was just beginning, along with a spiritual battle that would test my newfound faith. Returning home after my near-death experience and conversion was like entering a spiritual battleground. The center of occult activities now felt like enemy territory. As soon as I crossed the threshold, I felt an overwhelming oppression. The walls seemed to whisper, and shadows moved in the corners. I knew it wasn't my imagination. The evil spirits I had once invoked were still present and furious at my conversion. My first night home was a test of faith. I heard voices calling to me, promising doom and power if I returned to my old practices. Objects moved on their own, and I felt invisible presences brushing against me. But every time fear threatened to consume me, I prayed and quoted the scriptures I had learned in the hospital. The next day, with the help of Pastor Ramirez and some members of his church, I began the task of cleansing my home. It was a painful and terrifying process. Every object related to my past and witchcraft had to be destroyed: spell books, amulets, ritual candles, all of it. As we burned these items in the backyard, we experienced supernatural resistance. The fire changed colors, howls filled the air, and several group members felt nausea or dizziness. But we persisted in prayer, and gradually the atmosphere began to change. The battle was intense, but with each prayer, the hold of the past weakened, and a new sense of peace began to take hold. When I had to confront my family about my newfound faith, it was incredibly challenging. My mother, a practitioner of witchcraft, couldn't comprehend my conversion. "How can you betray our legacy?" she shouted at me. The pain and disappointment in her eyes were tangible, and it broke my heart to see her that way. Former clients and colleagues from the occult world began to harass me. I received threatening calls and terrifying messages. Some even tried to cast spells against me. There were nights when I felt spiritual attacks so intense that I struggled to breathe. One particularly difficult night, I awoke to a malicious presence in my room. I saw a shadowy figure at the foot of my bed, and I heard a voice saying, "We will never let you go." Fear paralyzed me momentarily, but then I remembered what I had learned. With all the strength I could muster, I commanded in the name of Jesus, "Leave here." The presence vanished instantly, leaving behind a sulfurous smell. This spiritual battle lasted for months. Each day was a struggle, but every small victory strengthened my faith. I learned to rely completely on God, to use the spiritual armor described in Ephesians 6, and to remain in constant prayer. Gradually, the supernatural manifestations in my home decreased, and the atmosphere began to change, becoming lighter and more peaceful. My neighbors noticed the difference. They no longer avoided passing by my house. One of the sweetest victories came when my mother, after months of resistance, agreed to speak with me. Although she didn't convert immediately, I saw a change in her. "There's something different about you," she said, "a peace you never had before." As I progressed in my new faith, I discovered that my knowledge of the spiritual world, although acquired mistakenly, could be useful on my new path. I began to help others trapped in occultism by sharing my testimony and showing them the way to true freedom in Christ. The spiritual battle didn't completely end, and I know it will continue as long as I am in this world. However, I now face it with strength and peace that can only come from God. Each day is an opportunity to grow in faith and be a living testimony to Christ's transformative power. My dark past has become a powerful tool for God's kingdom. Where I once sowed darkness, I can now sow light. And perhaps that is the greatest victory of all. Years have passed since my near-death experience and conversion, and my life is now unrecognizable compared to what it once was. Every day, I thank God for His mercy and grace. After my liberation, I felt a deep calling to share my testimony and help others ensnared in the darkness I once knew. With the guidance of Pastor Ramirez, I started a ministry focused on spiritual liberation and support for former occult practitioners. Our ministry, which we named From Darkness to Light, has grown beyond anything I could have imagined. We began with small meetings at the local church, but soon the demand grew. People from all over Mexico and even from other countries began contacting us for help. I remember especially a young woman named Lucia who came to us after years of practicing Santeria. She was tormented by visions and voices and was on the brink of suicide. We worked with her for months, praying, counseling, and guiding her to Christ. Today, Lucia is a leader in our ministry, and her testimony is as powerful as mine. Another case that touched my heart was that of Roberto, a former satanic priest. His liberation was one of the most intense spiritual battles I've experienced, but the power of God prevailed. Roberto is now a pastor and actively works in preventing occultism among the youth. As our ministry grew, we also faced opposition. We received threats from occult groups, and there were even attempts to sabotage our meetings. But each attack only strengthened our faith and determination. One of the greatest joys on this journey has been the reconciliation with my family. My mother, after witnessing the change in my life and the fruits of my ministry, finally accepted Christ 2 years ago. Baptizing her was one of the most emotional moments of my life, and seeing the transformation in her eyes was profound. Today, our ministry focuses not only on spiritual liberation, but also on education. We work with churches, schools, and community organizations to raise awareness about the dangers of occultism and offer hope through the gospel. I've had the opportunity to share my testimony on radio and television programs, and even wrote a book titled 6 Minutes in Hell: My Journey from Witchcraft to Christ. Through these means, we have reached thousands with the message of salvation and liberation. But not everything has been easy. There are still days when memories of my past haunt me. Sometimes in the quiet of the night, I can feel echoes of the spiritual battles I've fought. However, these moments no longer paralyze me with fear. Instead, they drive me to seek deeper into the presence of God. My message to those trapped in occultism or anyone who feels they are beyond redemption is simple. There is no darkness so profound that the light of Christ cannot penetrate. If God could rescue me from the very edge of hell, there is hope for anyone.